interesting dynamic here with Joseph's interaction, how he takes Simeon, and then they all go back to the land of Canaan from what I can understand from all the parallel accounts, it's like a year. So Simeon is being held for like a year. What do you guys think about that?
A lot of time to think about what he'd done.
But why just him, right?
He was singled out for some odd reason, right? I think after reading the Testament of Simeon, I noticed a couple things that kind of stood out that made me think that they had, Joseph and Simeon had butted heads throughout childhood and life, and that there was a unique interaction there, relationship.
Yeah, and I think he said he suffered more guilt than the rest of them because we're going to read about this a little bit later, but also in the Testament of Gad, he talks about he and Simeon seem to be like the main culprits in all this. Like they really wanted to kill Joseph, and it was Reuben and Judah that kind of diverted the plan to kill him into actually just selling him, and so Joseph is listening to all this conversation at the bottom of the well. You know what I'm saying? Like, and it talks that we're going to read here in a minute, where Simeon admits that, how much they heard Joseph crying out and pleading to them, and how much it tugged on their hearts, and but they still went through it. I mean, but as far as anger goes, it seems like Simeon and Gad, they really wanted to kill Joseph.
Yeah.
So this is, yeah.
Doesn't it say that he envied Joseph?
Yes.
Yeah.
Envy. Yeah. And also Gad, as well as a few of the other patriarchs, all admit and confess that there were unclean spirits taking part in influencing them to behave in that way.
Yep.
And that they all ended up repenting too, which is beautiful. I love Reuben's heart throughout it all. He's just like so upset about it.
Yeah, he really wanted to save Joseph and get him back to Jacob. But then by the time he got back to the well, they'd already sold him. And yeah, so there's like a whole backstory to this thing that we don't get in Genesis that just breaks my heart, because from what you read in Genesis, it looks like all 10 of the brothers just hated him and just wanted to just kill him and decided to sell him instead, which doesn't make a lot of sense if you have malice to kill someone. And so you start to realize the plot to actually sell him was the other brothers trying to save him. And that's the interesting part, because that's Reuben and Judah standing up. But like, from my understanding, Levi's not even in the picture because he's down at Bethel ministering the priesthood. And that means you've got, from what you put all the accounts together between Jubilees and Testament of Joseph, like there's only like 6 or 7 of the brothers involved in this process. And so it's not like all 10 of them, and not all 10 of them didn't uniformly want him to die or even want to sell him. So it's that same dynamic you see in life, where there's a couple of bad characters, and the other men in the group, if you don't stand up for what's right, the bad characters will rule and enforce the tyranny. You know what I mean? And that's where apparently Simeon and Gad were the main culprits. Yeah. So that's pretty rough. And here's, where's Asher? Where's Zebulon? Where's, what's up with all these other dudes? I don't know if it was just a physical dominance thing, because apparently Simeon and Gad were like the strongest and the most violent of the brothers. So it's like, is it just simply they were intimidated? And, you got, Zebulon and Asher in the background, and a couple of other dudes that are just like, I can't take out Simeon, so I can't say anything. You know what I mean?
Well, but go ahead, Westway.
No, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, it seems like regardless of what the different brothers thought or wanted to do, or who wanted to save him or whatever, Jacob still believes that his son is dead. So they must have united in telling the story to their father and keeping that secret this entire time.
Oh yeah. They're all implicit in the cover up. Again, that's just like they were implicit in the selling. They didn't, none of them went home and just told on whomever of the brothers were the main instigators of this. So they definitely all covered it up, and they all, in their own way, suffered for the lie for 20 years. For 20 years.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine.
It just got worse and worse on their consciences, right? Bad things happen when good people stand by and let bad people do things, or let people make bad choices, right? Even if it's your own family. Mm-hmm. I loved it kind of cracked me up in verse 1 that Jacob learned that there was grain in Egypt, and he looked to his sons and he's like, what are y'all staring at each other for? What are y'all just standing around? Y'all found out there was food. It's a famine right now.
Yeah, like they're just having that, chat at the end of the day. They come in from their herds and they're like, yeah, we're running out of grain. It hurts. So they're just looking at each other, and Jacob's sitting in the back row, the old patriarch, just being like, I could see him sitting by the fire, sitting on a stool, looking up, watching these dudes just talk about how they're slowly running out of grain and provisions. And he's like, what are you guys looking at each other for? Go get some food. Travel to some other land and buy some food. It is hilarious. Like an old man who has no filter anymore.
Yeah.
You can imagine they'd had conversations for a couple of nights and he'd held his tongue for a little while. It's like, I can't take this anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, it's funny. And that's something I thought about while even going over the study again is because, man, when I do these, these actual Torah portion study materials, I get to go over it in great depth because I go over it like 5 different times on different, I do different sweeps through the actual text to look for different things as like compile what you see. And so I go through it like 5 different times and it just kind of dawned on me. I was like, wait a minute, like the grain, because I always used to think like, what are they making? Like, why are the grain? What are they making with so much grain? Like, how many things can you actually make in your variety? They must have had a very limited diet or very limited, culinary choices because you can only make so much with grain. But then I kind of shook myself awake and realized, wait a minute, the animals need the grain.
Mm-hmm.
Like the animals need the grain. The animals are the ones that they used to create other forms of produce. They had the water wasn't the problem, right? But if you don't have a strong animal that can actually till that ground for you, or go and help you bring in the harvest, as you might need, it's very difficult to have an abundance of food of different types of food. So the grain was super important, just like in modern times, right? Grain prices are like 3 times as what they were 15 months ago for a lot of farmers in the US. And so it makes it much more difficult to produce the same amount that you used to, right? You're just like in Pharaoh's dream, the cows are thinner because they're not getting enough food. They're not getting enough grain. So
I ran across this statement in Exodus, I want to say 16, and I forget the context of it, whether it was contextually applicable to like all of life or just for a certain situation. But God was like, you shall eat bread in the morning and meat at night or dinner. Was that like a standard of a traditional diet? Like you would have breakfast you would have grain, bread for breakfast, and then you would have your meat, your sustenance of the animal for dinner.
I thought that was around when they were getting the manna in the morning and then the quail in the evening.
I think it was. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Is that what that was? That's right.
Yeah.
I don't know.
But the other thing too, Sean, when you're talking about the animals would plow, even if you didn't have animals that were plowing and stuff like that, if you just had a sheep, a flock of sheep, you would eat the sheep and then they produce milk and all the different things that you can do at the dairy. Right. So even if the animals just ate the grain and they weren't, because when I think about a famine, my mind initially went that, oh yeah, they fed the grain to the animals and then they got, all kinds of milk and they just survived on the meat and the milk and stuff. But I didn't think about the animals, tilling the ground and them still actually having produce and that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's just the whole cycle is being disrupted when your workforce, your labor force of the animals can't help you, so it's very interesting. And since I wasn't an actual farmer, I'm sure there's people that have animals and farmers and ranchers in the audience are just laughing at me right now. Like, well, of course, dummy, but I wasn't raised on a farm, so I don't have any familiarity with a lot of that kind of stuff. So it's just interesting to see though that all the cultures back then were mostly agricultural societies, and even still today, a lot of people don't realize how much we depend on farmers, and I think that's the sad thing. Because I wish that everybody had a small version of a garden in their backyard, in addition to the local farmers with their large plots of land and their large produce gatherings. I wish everyone could have the familiarity to grow and go out and till the land on their own, get their hands and feet in the soil. I think there's something extremely therapeutic about that, the way we were designed to go out and do that. And I'm not trying to get into like new age stuff about, what happens to you when you touch the soil, but there is something very therapeutic about going out and working the land, for sure. So in this particular chapter, we had, wait 1 second here. So this at this point is almost they're still debating at the end of this about whether or not they're going to go back and take Benjamin with them, because that was the request from Joseph, right? Next time you come back, if you want Simeon, you got to bring Joseph down so I can see him. And it's interesting that these brothers throughout this whole little scenario, they're not really catching on, right? Because they just don't recognize Joseph. I mean, the guy's speaking Egyptian, right? Because it says later he actually starts speaking Hebrew with them so they can understand him, and there's an interpreter with him the whole time.
And
so
it had been 20 years, you know.
Yes,
so
that's right. Yeah, I don't look the same when I was 17. So, and especially if we're talking ancient Egypt, and especially if he's got on like makeup and, you know, a whole bunch of like some sort of headdress or whatever, you know, all the different things that their leaders would wear, all the jewelry and everything. So yeah, it's very possible that he had no clue. They had no clue because they could physically recognize him, and his voice may not sound the same either. Yeah, so I just think it's interesting to me that during this process, the brothers don't seem to catch on. Like, why does this guy want to see our little brother? You know, it's kind of a weird request, you know?
It is.
Yeah. How does that validate that they're not spies?
Right. Exactly. And so as a result of this, Simeon's being held in jail. And so then they go back to the father, and the father's like, no, I'm not sending Benjamin with you. But then there's no resolution. And we're going to read about that in the next chapter, how Judah goes up to him and was like, dude, we could have been there and back twice by now. Like, what are you doing, Jacob? We gotta make a decision here. You know, Simeon's not with us. Let us just take Benjamin with us. So at this point, Jacob is still delaying, and that's interesting because he doesn't want to let Benjamin go. He's afraid to lose him as well. But here in Genesis 42, for the summary, it says the famine reached the land of Canaan. Jacob sent 10 of Joseph's brothers to Egypt to purchase grain. Joseph recognized his brothers when they arrived in Egypt. Joseph recognized his brothers when they arrived in Egypt to buy grain and treated them harshly, accusing them of being spies. Joseph manipulates the situation in order for his brothers to come again to Egypt and bring Benjamin with them the next time. And Joseph holds Simeon in jail for the year time period between the brothers taking grain back to Jacob and their next trip back to Egypt with Benjamin. Jacob doesn't want Benjamin to go, but Reuben vows for Benjamin's security. And I think that this, to me, this kind of tugged at my heart when I lined up the rest of Jubilees and the Testament of Reuben about how much Reuben was trying to save Joseph originally, and he couldn't. And so then here is another potential moment where he might lose another younger brother. And they're already, like, their conversation in Egypt, they're already blaming this whole bad scenario because of what they did to Joseph. Like, that's their internal conversation, is like, oh man, what is happening to us? And they just keep going, it's because we did this to Joseph. Like, they're just like oh, we can't hear you, West Bliss.
My bad. Like, every time something bad happened, they would immediately be like, this is our, you know, repayment for what we did to him. You know, it's we reap what we sow.
Do you think that was more because of just a conscience issue, or do you think that was because they had parts of the law that said curses for sin and blessings for righteousness?
A little of both. Yeah, a little of both, personally. Yeah, it's hilarious to me. So that's why my heart goes out to Reuben, especially when you read about how repentant Reuben was for what he had already done to Jacob with Bilhah, and how he struggled with that for such a long time that he wouldn't even look Jacob in the eyes for 7 years. And so therefore, here's another moment where he's like, you know, he doesn't want to bring his father any more pain, and he feels like he has because he couldn't save Joseph. And he sees how Jacob mourned for Joseph for like an entire year. And then here's this additional opportunity come up in his life where he may fail again, or he's fearing that he may fail again with Benjamin's, you know, so he's like personally vowing his own 2 sons and himself for the security of Benjamin, which I think is pretty severe. Like
a collateral, right?
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, if I don't bring Benjamin back, you can kill my 2 sons. Like, that's crazy.
Yeah,
that's crazy.
Jacob's like, oh, I'm going to lose all my kids.
Yeah. Yeah, that's wild. So anything else in this chapter, guys?
What was this, chapter 42? Yeah, they did Joseph dirty, and right, he's now in the position to give him a hard time. So he's like, y'all are some spies, right? Prove yourself. But really, he's got this plan to bring the family back together.